Well, in some ways, I've been working on that bill for 20 years because I saw firsthand how racism is embedded into our criminal justice system. So when I had the opportunity working with the Anti-Death Penalty Coalition to push forward the Racial Justice Act, it was really very much of a full circle moment, and was one of the most challenging and interesting pieces of legislation I ever worked on, both in terms of the substance, but also the path it took during a year in which COVID struck and George Floyd was murdered. And all this was happening the year that the Racial Justice Act was trying to make its way through the legislature. It was an incredible journey. Well, the way our state public defender put it when it was passed, she referred to it as the most influential piece of criminal jurisprudence that passed this century. And the reason why she said that, and the reason why I believe that's true, is because over the generations, we've known that there are racial disparities in our criminal justice system. The outcomes are very clearly racist, and yet we've never given tools to actually root out that racism. And this is the first chance and first opportunity where we're giving tools to attorneys to actually challenge the racism in the courts. So the way the Racial Justice Act works, it allows the accused to challenge their arrest, conduct during trial, conviction, and sentencing based upon racial bias. And the profound impact that has is it allows us to finally have a court look at things other than explicit racism. You don't see that much explicit racism in California anymore. I think those that might even harbor those feelings are smart enough not to know not to say things out loud to expose their racist intentions. And that's not how racism really works for the most part. It's implicit. It happens oftentimes, unconsciously. And what this allows is using data to show that individuals are being treated differently. It has an enormous impact on our criminal justice system by, first of all, allowing the accused to actually get fair and equal treatment. But I think even more profoundly, looking ahead to the next generation of police officers, of judges, of DAs, and defense attorneys, it leads towards behavior change, because now it becomes a part of the thought process of why you charge someone, what you arrest them for, why you're arresting them, what a judge sentences someone to, how an appellate court may approach an appeal, how a defense attorney may respond to their clients. And so we're really hoping that we'll see behavioral change in the years ahead. We've also started to look at the same thing in healthcare and kind of racism from doctors and healthcare professionals. Again, maybe not consciously, but that awareness is critical. And I absolutely think there's an opportunity to bring this down to the local level. And it already is, in a sense, because we're talking about law enforcement and DA's offices. So in that sense, it has been brought down to the local level. And unfortunately, when we were pushing this forward, our own DA opposed it and spoke against it during Senate Public Safety hearings. But now he's forced to have to contend with it. And I think that's a good thing. We do have some prosecutors that are very much in favor of the Racial Justice Act and implementing it in a very productive, constructive manner. But the reality is, whether they like it or not, it's the law of the land now here in California. And we see other states looking at it as well. And so I do hope it leads to behavior change, not just in the confines of the criminal justice system, but in terms of how government operates. And so I think there is room for us to expand, if not the law, the mindset behind it and the idea of behavior change to the local level and local governance. Yeah, so California, in our legislature, we have a supermajority of Democrats, but not all Democrats are progressives. And I think there's an opportunity for us to really advance progressive policies if we're organized. And so the idea is to become more organized as progressive members. And it's a pretty new caucus. We're still trying to figure out how to best operate. We do set policy priorities. We just started an endorsement process of those who are running for state legislature, in particular the assembly. And so my goal is to set up an infrastructure and an ecosystem that not only helps to elect progressive members, but once we're there, how do we really push our policies forward, and how are we successful in getting progressive legislation passed in California? I was on the governor's future of work commission that he set forth, and right now I just got approved to chair a select committee through the State Assembly on the future of work and workers. What we're finding is that as we're seeing more technology enter the workplace, it's being used by corporations to really squeeze every ounce of productivity out of workers without empowering workers. So it could be a technology company having the camera on when you're working from home, counting every keystroke, or it could be an Amazon warehouse where they're checking to see how much you're working, whether you're going to the bathroom or not, or a UPS driver and making sure that every single turn you make is as efficient as possible on your route. We want to empower workers, and we want to recognize that with technology, we absolutely can create a more efficient work environment, but we can't leave workers out of the equation. We have to make sure that workers are empowered and that we're creating more jobs that are protective of not just corporate profits, but actually of workers and their dignity at work and their ability to make a living wage. Being the chair of a committee, you can set the agenda for the committee. You also can really steer the conversation based upon that agenda, based upon who you have speaking at your committee hearings. And really, you want to guide it towards legislation. It shouldn't be just busy work. And whenever I've done informational hearings as chair of our labor committee, or prior to that as chair of our aging and long-term care committee, when I've done informational hearings or work outside of our foundational committee work, it's always been to figure out what kind of laws we need to pass to better protect Californians, or what kind of budget priorities we should set to better protect Californians.
What are ways in which we can empower ourselves, especially junior faculty who are non-tenured, going against a provost or something like that, asking show us the money. So what do we do?
Well, I think there has to be accountability. I think there has to be proactive. There has to be a proactive mindset of making sure that you're tracking exactly where the money is, and meeting with the administration, bringing students along, I think can always be helpful, kind of joining forces with folks in the student body that are supportive. And I believe, when I look at it from the Racial Justice Act perspective, I see my responsibility of getting feedback on the ground from public defenders. So in the case of ethnic studies, getting feedback from the campuses, hey, how's it going? Are you facing resistance or not? Because there can always be follow-up action from the legislature. And so that is not ideal, but it's oftentimes what's necessary, because we do face resistance to different laws we pass. For example, I worked with San State University Human Rights Initiative to pass the CLEAR Act. And that requires police departments, as part of their background process, to root out any candidates who are part of violent extremist groups, like the Proud Boys and Three Percenters and all that. And so I know that in certain areas like San Jose, probably not going to be a problem for the police department to follow through on that. They already did a lot of that anyway. They would comb through Instagram and Facebook and see kind of what the attitudes are of the potential candidates for their police department. But there's a lot of counties, about 58 counties, that have a very different mindset and aren't going to do it. And so we know we have to follow up and make it very clear this is the law now, and we don't want police departments continuing to hire white supremacists and white nationalists. And similarly with the Racial Justice Act, I know that, in fact, I'm doing legislation this year as what we call cleanup legislation, whenever we see gaps as it's being executed. Now that we actually passed it, now we're seeing how it's being used in the court system, we might learn something from that process. Similarly, with any legislation, including the Ethnic Studies Bill, now that it's the law, let's see how it's being executed. And if there's gaps in how it's being executed, if administrations have too much power and faculty don't, or student bodies don't, there can always be, if not legislation, at least check-ins from the legislature to make sure that they're following the intent of the legislature and not just taking the money and doing with it what they will.